Amazing. Okay. Hey, everybody. Thanks for waiting while we got started today. I'm Haley Wood with the Local Food Safety Collaborative, and today we're going to be talking about co-management and conservation in food safety with Camila Rodriguez at Auburn University. Today, Camila is going to talk about some research and a study they've been working on, a survey for the last 2 years, highlighting conservation practices and pest management, animal deterrence, vegetation management, all kind of under the umbrella of safe farm management and food safety. We'll talk a little bit about some of the challenges that growers face in this food safety and conservation realm, and as well maybe some program awareness around USDA. I want to talk a little bit about Camila first before we get started. So, Camila Rodriguez is an assistant professor and food safety specialist, extension specialist in the Department of Horticulture at Auburn. Her research is focused on identifying resources of fresh produce contamination and processing, and also implementing mitigation strategies to minimize the risk of produce contamination in conventional, organic, and soilless farming systems. And as a part of an interdisciplinary team, Dr. Rodriguez's outreach program is focused on developing educational material, mainly specialized food safety programs and other trainings to assist growers and stakeholders in improving and promoting their food safety practices. So I'm really excited to have her on today. She's going to be leading us through this survey and kind of the work they've been doing for the last few years. At any time, if you've got questions, please feel free to use Q&A. It should be in your lower tab where you often find like your chat and your reactions and all of that. And if there's anything that comes up, during or things that need clarification, I'll try to catch those as it's going on, but we'll wait for questions until after she's done talking. Um, I think we're having just like a little bit of a spotty internet connection today, so just be patient in case like things freeze up. We'll jump right back in if anything slows down. And otherwise, Camilla, is there anything I missed or anything you want to say to introduce yourself before we get started?
No, you've done a great job. Thank you so much. And I'm very happy to be here and discuss a little bit about this topic today.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, well, feel free. We're excited to have you. Feel free to take over the screen share and I'll pop back in case any chats or questions come
Right.
up.
Let me share my screen. Can you see my and the presenter view, like the
Yeah,
slideshows?
yep, it's coming up.
Yeah,
Looks
awesome.
good.
Okay, great. So thank you so much for having me today here. And I'm happy to talk a little bit about our survey and our studies that we are doing about conservation practices and that are in balance with food safety in the farm. Um, so first of all, just give a little bit of introduction of the importance of conservation practices in the farm in terms of sustainable agriculture. We all know that conservation practices are very aligned with protecting natural resources, water resources, soil health management, and also reducing environmental impacts, promoting sustainable farming practices that minimize pollution, greenhouse gas emission and biodiversity loss, and also enhances farm resilience, by conserving soil and water in the farm. It helps farms become more resilient to climate changes and extreme weather conditions. And also it promotes biodiversity, by, preserving soil and the water and the environment. It helps to contribute to a healthier ecosystem and environment and support the biodiversity of beneficial insects and microorganisms. But we know that farms are very complex systems. So especially here in Alabama, we have a lot of diversified farms, and we have small growers that they have livestock, animals on their farm. They grow produce, but they also sometimes they're very close to some big poultry operations. Alabama is a big poultry producer state. So we have a very complex farming environment and farming system around here. So we have abundance in water resources as well, surface water. We have a lot of vegetative areas, but so that again, we have a lot of wildlife around the farm environment. We have growers using um, poultry as a manure on the farm, composting. But we have also, again, we have migratory birds and then specific times of the year. We have farming animals. We have sometimes those livestock operations close by. So again, it's a very complex system, and growers need to take actions and take measures on both balancing the conservation practices and food safety practice. So we call it a co-management. We put it on a balance, on a scale. So in one side, growers need to promote a ecological balance and conserve natural resources. On the other side, they also have to follow practices that reduce microbial hazards and protect the public health. So a little bit about, history, again, how conservation practices were aligned with food safety. Back in 2006, there was a big outbreak with E. coli 057H7 associated with prepackaged spinach. So the bacteria was found in cattle feces and in the river and in the surrounding area. So at that time, farms thought that they needed to clear the area to make the area more free of, clear up the area so they would keep the animals away, keep the area cleaner. And then, so what happened over a 5-year period, local habitat and degradation happened in around the area where about 13% of riparian and wetland vegetation were converted to bare grounds of crops. So that way, there was a minimal or little knowledge about these conservation practices, how they were food safety friendly or not. So at the beginning, at that time, they thought about removing that big area of vegetation would help reduce those food safety risks. But what happened 5 years later, they've done a study to evaluate if those loss of the removal of vegetation out of the area had an impact on microbial, on the pathogen prevalence in the area. And what they found is that the opposite, removing riparian and other natural vegetation did not reduce the prevalence of the pathogenic E. coli over time. In fact, increase the prevalence of this pathogen E. coli. There happen changes in the cropland, changes in the riparian areas, changes in natural resources, all promoted a disbalance. So they found that farmers that replaced those natural vegetation with cropland were significantly more likely to experience an increase in pathogenic E. coli prevalence. So over time, they found that removing those vegetation or clearing up the area or disbalance the ecosystem, it is a food safety risk on the farm environment. So again, going back to the co-management practices, we talk about promoting conservation practices versus food safety on the farm. And we all know that is a huge challenge. It's not easy, like we talk about, okay, let's do this in order to have that. So that's why we have to work through with farmers and make sure that what they're following, what practices they're performing, they're doing on the farm, they are food safety friendly, but they're also promoting conservation at the same time. We know after several research nowadays, there a lot of research showing that conservation practices are promoting food safety on the farm. But to think about it, how growers are perceiving that, how they, what about the knowledge of the growers? So about 2 years ago, we ran a survey in the Southeast among our produce growers to look for growers' awareness on food safety and conservation practices. So we recruited about 111 participants for our research, for our survey. Majority of them were from Georgia, but we had about 23% from Alabama, 8% from Florida, and 3% from Mississippi. So growers in the Southeast. When we asked them, the survey had about 15 to 20 questions there. It was a long survey. We collected a lot of data, but I'm gonna just present some of the major outcomes that we come from this. It's still unpublished data. We're under revision to publish this work, but I think what we wanted to see from this survey is that we wanted to identify knowledge gaps and in order to develop programs and educational materials for growers in our area. So first of all, when we asked them what kind of practices they do on their farm in terms of food safety concerns and what practice they do regarding conservation concerns. So again, I'm not going to go through the whole table, but I'm just going to pinpoint some main results that we found here. When we asked them about food safety concerns, a lot of them reported about nearly 30% of them reported partial vegetation removal from ditches and farm ponds, which again, we've seen in the past that removing vegetation is not a food safety friendly practice. So there is a misconception on that area based on our respondents' questions. Also, nearly 20% of them mentioned clearing vegetation to create bare ground buffers, or even 13% of them reported complete vegetation removal from ditches and farm ponds. Again, we were able to identify a knowledge gap here that growers are still perceiving that removing vegetation around the farm are practices that they're done to reduce food safety risks. And another thing I wanted to point out here is that 26% of those reported that they had to do some sort of irrigation water treatment, or even had to stop using contaminated water source from pre-harvest water. Again, this could be a of removing around water sources or around the farm that could compromise the safety of their water they're using again. But when we asked them about their conservation practices. If you look at the total, most of them, they're following crop rotation, IPM, cover cropping, but just 3% of them are doing some sort of riparian zone restoration around their farm. Again, that thought about vegetation or preserving those vegetation area around the farm, around water sources are not still clearly seen as a food safety practice or a food safety friendly practice in the farm. Also, when we asked those growers about their perception, again, between food safety farm and conservation and between those topics, 20% of those growers self-reported perceiving that food safety and conservation practices are in conflict. So they don't think it is a challenge. The majority of them, they don't think it is a challenge to balance food safety and conservation practices. But 64% of them report that food safety and conservation have an impact on land management decisions. So they are aware, most of them, they're aware that those two practices are important on the farm. And 35% of them perceive that developing a whole farm plan that incorporates food safety and conservation is difficult. Again, we know this is a challenge. There is some misperception of what conservation practices can be or cannot be food safety friendly. So we need to focus more on developing programs that are focused on conservation practice and show them how this conservation practice can improve food safety on the farm. And when we did some statistical analysis within the data, we found some associations between farming method and management practices for food safety and conservation. So based on the farming methods of the farming, whether they were conventional, mixed, certified naturally grown, certified organic, or regenerative, we found that growers that the conventional growers or mixed growers, they're more likely to follow partial or complete vegetation removal, bare ground buffers, animal deterrents, stop using contaminated water, using irrigation water treatment, relocation of animals, IPM, crop rotation, cover cropping, direct planting, use of windbreaks, riparian zone restoration, and grassed air waterways, versus the CNGs, organic and regeneratives, and others are less likely to use these kind of practices on their farm. On the other hand, growers that follow organic practices or CNGs or regenerative, they're more likely to follow relocation of animals, wild animals, composting and manure treatments, and the use of native plants for pest predators. Again, and then the conventional mixed farms are less likely to use those kind of practices. Again, these results just suggest that the growing methods that are used at a particular farm might predict the farm level of awareness regarding the implementation of conservation practices and that can be followed for food safety again. So it gave us some knowledge about what are the challenges on what kind of programs we need to be implementing in our area. And then again, lastly, when we asked about those growers with the experience with some of the federal conservation programs that are available for them, only about 10%, overall 10%, not even 10% of them, they're approved for some of these programs or applied to the microloans, NRCS programs, and FSA programs. But interesting is that nearly 40% of those growers are not even aware of these federal conservation programs, which is also, again, something we needed to focus on promoting more of those programs regionally and make growers aware that they have these programs and they can use these programs. And some of these programs are the Natural Resource Conservation Service, the NRCS, the Conservation Planning Program, Conservation Stewardship Program, and an Environmental Quality Incentive Program. They're all available for farmers in their area that they can apply. They can most of the time get full reimbursement for conservations that they practices and they can do in the farm. Also, the FSA, the Farm Service Agency, they have the microloans that can help growers to pay for financially pay for fencing, trellis, or any bees equipment, for GAP programs or GHP programs, or any cost with certification organic certification programs. Again, those programs, those regional programs, can help financially support growers, promote conservation practices on their farm. For example, here in Alabama, the NRCS has a program can help growers they can fund growers to install irrigation on their farm, irrigation systems on their farm. So again, we know that implementing irrigation systems on the farm are conservation practices friendly, because you reduce water usage, conserve water resources, and also it's a food safety friendly practices, especially if they're using drip irrigation systems. So some of these programs they're available for the farms, and most of them they are not aware of these programs. And again, just talking about how conservation can be aligned with food safety, some examples here. We know the attract natural predators are, good practices that can reduce food safety risk. There are some few studies showing that migratory birds are more likely to be transporting pathogens or bringing pathogens to the farm versus some native birds. So their research on that. IPM practices also are conservation practices friendly, use less pesticides, and also it aligns with the food safety practices. Composting, we know it's safe versus using raw manure, but also, aligned with the conservation practices. Using vegetative buffers around, especially around water sources, helps to prevent, it filters a lot of this runoff that comes into the water sources, into the surface water sources. Windbreaks as well. So if growers have farms that are close by animal operations, rotation grazing, irrigation systems, and all of that. They're all practices that are conservation and food safety friendly practices.
Camilla,
And
would you mind repeating what you said about just right before windbreaks and rotation
yes.
crops? You cut out just a little bit. Maybe it was about vegetation buffers.
Okay, yes. So when we talk about those food safety practices and this conservation practices that are very food safety friendly, so windbreaks, when there are farm operations around some animal operations, or growers normally, if they have windbreaks around their farm or their area, it helps filter through some air around it. Rotational grazing, and also irrigation, implementing irrigation, installing irrigation system in the farm are all conservation and food safety friendly practices. So based on historically, and based on our assessment from the survey, we started developing and implementing some programs here in Alabama and in the Southeast to help growers to become more aware of these conservation practices and how can be applied on reducing food safety risks. So one of them, a lot of you might be familiar with the Farm Innovation Project. So it was led by Christine Woods and collaborators from Alabama A&M, and Fort Valley State University, and the National Farmers Union, and the Deep South Food Alliance. So this was a very successful program that it helped growers on installing and learning about irrigation systems, cleaning and sanitation programs to implement in the farm that are very farm friendly, easy to be done in the farm, animal and insect exclusion, and the importance of keeping vegetative buffers around the farm, rotational grazing, the importance of keeping sustainability on the farm, and in the part of processing and cold chain as well. So it was a very successful program that we were able to help growers throughout the Southeast. Also, we've done some few workshops about planning for leaders. We got farmers and beekeepers for a few workshops that we've done in farmers, few days, and also one we did in the botanical garden to make growers aware of the importance of pollinators and the importance of keeping this pollinator at the planting for pollination. It is also a food safety friendly practice, and also help growers keep sustainability on the farm. Also, we have a online program. It's a self-paced program called Smart Food Certification. We talk a lot about food safety practices, organic certification, and some other programs dedicated for small fruit growers as well, so that it's available online and still can be taken. It's free access, so just enroll online and you get a certification for small fruits. It's also, we talk a lot about food safety and some conservation practices for those specific growers. And also we developed the ag water safety program also to help growers to keep the water source safe and helping them navigate through regulatory standards related to the water source. So that again, we provide free water testing and technical support to the growers in Alabama. And growers can reach out to us and we can provide free water testing, microbial water testing to the farm. And also we help them navigate through the results and what kind of mitigation strategies they can do on their farm and any corrective actions that can be done. And just to wrap this up, we know that although both food safety and conservation practices, they directly impact land management decisions, the complexities of implementing a whole farm plan that integrate both of these practices is a challenging, but again, it's not impossible. And I think through the programs we develop, through consultation and workshops and field days, we try to help growers on a daily basis on identifying those practices and implementing the practices that are both aligned with the conservation and food safety practices as well. Here's my contact, and I'm open for questions.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Camila. Thanks for walking us through that. I feel like as a grower and somebody who's still learning about all the food safety programs and how it connects with conservation, this was really, really informative. I want to give our listeners maybe some time to go through some questions. I definitely have some questions for you, just listening.
Okay.
I'm really surprised, it's interesting, maybe in this last half here, you were talking about like there were some really common sense sustainability practices that people do on their farm, right? Like integrated pest management, composting, rotational grazing. People may be doing that and they maybe don't have the perception aligned that like those are also, kind of in line with being food safe on the farm. So it seems like there's still this big gap in for growers to understand that like these things are connected. They don't have to be separate. And yeah, just to say that it's interesting to see that perception is still kind of this big question mark around food safety.
Yeah, and it is a challenge because it's not something easy. We tell them, don't remove vegetation around the farm, but sometimes, some areas need to be cleared, but some areas need to be preserved. Like I think it's a farm to farm situation, but in general,
Yeah.
preserving natural resources it's a key to promoting food safety. That's for sure.
Yeah. We've got two questions.
Yes.
This one's from Billy. Could you share some examples of wildlife intrusion onto farms and maybe something one of the respondents shared with you about that, or any tips on managing those specific examples?
Yeah, for example, wildlife intrusion. We talk about wildlife and the conservation practices. We think about water sources, for example. Water source, in this picture, I think it's a good picture. I like this picture. It was from a pond we have a big vegetative buffer around the area. So we don't see a lot of wild animals coming inside the water source at that part, but you see across the pond, it's a very clear bare ground area. There we see a lot of animal activity, wildlife activity. That is, I think, a visual example when you see how vegetative buffers around the water sources or even around the farm can prevent even wildlife intrusion within the areas. I think that's a good example. Again, removing that vegetative buffer or vegetative areas around the farm, around water sources, can become even more attractive to animals to come. And what was the other question?
it was like, yeah, maybe also, are there any tips in managing wildlife intrusion and maybe anything you've heard from some of your respondents about, an
You know,
environment like this?
yeah, so growers always report it's almost impossible to keep deers outside your farm, for example. So we say we kind of the best method is fencing, fence around the areas and so on, which is sometimes it's a burden because it's expensive. But again, some strategies like fencing or vegetation buffers around the farm can be some practices that can be adopted to prevent animal intrusion. And again, NRCS and some of those federal programs can financially support the growers on installing fences on their farm if they report issues or if they need to be installing that as a way to promote conservation on their farm or minimize food safety risks.
Okay, so that's interesting. So yeah, you could maybe apply for something like through NRCS under the umbrella of conservation, even as it's kind of helping with
Yes.
wildlife intrusion. That's cool. I didn't really think about that.
Yeah, and we have examples of growers that they've done it in the farm, and then we advise them to some of those workshops that we've done, especially with the farm innovation. We had some growers reporting us that they were completely unaware of this. The NRCS and some of those federal programs could help them financially install fences around the farm because they were reporting have issues with wildlife or uh, but again it's a financial burden a lot of times, especially with fences. They're too expensive. Yeah, but so we guided them through some of these federal programs, and some of them I think they're successfully applying and got financial support from those programs. So we had
Yeah.
a pretty good successful some successful stories to coming from these workshops and trainings that we've done focus on this area.
I have a question about those programs, but I want to get to a question from Jonathan. He's asking, what would you recommend as a starting point to reach out to farms to improve their food safety and conservation practices? Maybe like more broad.
More broad, I would think like first of all, I think the best practice is also consulting with local agencies, extension personnel, and reaching out to their point of contact. But in general, keeping monitoring the quality of their water, using less pesticides. So implementing IPM in the farm is also a good way to minimize, impacts of following conservation, like those intensive farming methods that they do, like use of pesticides and all of that can be, again, reverse to promoting conservation. It also can impact food safety, so I think the basic following basic practices in the farm that the growers normally do: crop rotation, IPM, and monitor for water quality, monitor for soil health, and they're all, again, food safety friendly practices that also can be done. But again, a lot of those need to be paid attention when they're, for example, when they're using manure on the farm. They need to make sure that they're properly treating or properly applying manure on the farm. And when they're following IPM practices, they're following IPM according to the local regulatory standards and all of that. Again, it's tricky, but I think the basics work, especially for small and diversified farms.
Yeah, something I always love to hear from Billy Mitchell is like often the answer you'll get from a lot of people in food safety is that it's complicated and it depends. And it always rings true, feels like for every topic in food safety.
It is. And again, it's not an easy task. And I think that's continuous education, it's always going to be the key. And again, it depends the area, it depends the grower's practice, it depends where the farm is located, depending, again, if they have animals in the farm and what kind of produce they grow and everything. It is complex. And again, as I said, farming is a complex system. So implementing practices in the farm, again, it needs to have this balance. You cannot be too extreme on food safety practices or what we think that are food safety practices, because you might disbalance conservation and then you create this disbalance. And also, again, if you're too prone to leaning towards conservation, some of those practices they can implicate on the food safety. Like if you're not properly treating manure, again, you increase the risks of food safety and all of that. So I think, again, it needs to be in the balance.
We've got one question about from Mark about maybe buffer crops or like sacrificial crops. He's asking how successful is planting sacrificial crops or buffer crops for wildlife. We all often think about this on our own farm for even insects as well. Just kind of something to offer up for the wildlife so it doesn't get to the thing that you need to sell.
Yeah. So I know that, for example, some GAP audit programs like the Global GAP is now requiring farmers to at least have 3% of their farm area and planted for pollinators. So they need to dedicate some areas on their farm. So Global GAP is one of the programs. So programs farmers are very encouraged now to plant for pollinators, plant native plants and have a dedicated area for those pollinators. And again, it depends on the farm where they want to plant, because sometimes it can attract more animals, wildlife, if they're planting too close to the fields as well, right? And it also depends on the type of plants they're planting. I know a lot of growers in our area, not very familiar with the pollinators, but I know a lot of growers here, they plant buckwheat and a lot of natural native plants as a buffer around the farm. So that also, again, attract some animals to the area, but attract pollinators. They're again, safe to say that it's food safety friendly. And as I mentioned, it is a tough, yeah, in terms of the pollinators and stuff. I think there are some research showing that native plants, planting for pollinators and native plants and native animals are less likely to be a food safety risk rather than migratory or and transient animals that come, insects and birds that comes in the farm.
Yeah, I feel like listening to you answer that, it also makes me think, well, you're kind of adding to this buffer zone. Surely, even if it's not for the intended purpose of giving up crops to the wildlife, it's creating some kind of intentional environment for restoration or just an additional like layer of protection of diversity,
Yeah,
which
and
seems
then
helpful.
oftentimes I hear from farmers saying that when they follow a lot of food conservation practices, they keep the soil health, they keep the plants healthy. Their plants are less likely to get diseases, or to,
Yeah.
So all of this is also when we promote biodiversity is also something that it helps, prevent in some way directly or indirectly helps to minimize some of the food safety risks as well.
We don't have any
But
more
I know there are
questions.
a lot of
Oh, sorry.
yes.
Sorry, go ahead.
No,
I think you were
again, I was
buffering.
saying, yeah, a lot of research. There are a lot of folks focused on research dedicated, this area, how animals, wildlife, how birds and then all of that can contribute to food safety or not, like to minimizing or increasing risks in the farm. And then so
Yeah,
far, what I've seen, most recent research that they're showing what we already expect, that the conservation practices, when they're followed correctly, implemented on the farm correctly, they are food safety friendly.
right. Just making sure, like you said, kind of sticking with the basics and implementing
Yes.
them on the ground.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wanted to maybe finish with a question, and obviously, if you're listening and you have a question, please feel free to type it in. But something I wanted to go back to was kind of this, you highlighted a communication gap between these federal programs and farmers. And I'm curious what you think are some better solutions or strategies that, the federal oversight can kind of connect with growers, because obviously things like extension, universities, groups like Farmers Union, like we try to be that hand to like kind of offer up those solutions. But I'm curious if you had any perspective on what might make that connection easier so people are in the know.
Yeah, I think our successful story about helping growers with become more aware of these programs. We started inviting those federal agents like the NRCS to come to our workshops, to come to our field
Okay.
days. A lot of times we, like the farm innovation, always whenever had an event for the farm innovation, the NRCS was there. So they had representatives that would help the growers within the area of they needed help. So a lot of times we do field days for, like, for example, for vegetable production, but we invite someone from NRCS to talk about implementing the programs about implementing irrigation systems on the farm, fencing and all of that. So the way we found it was success was inviting representatives from those local areas, from the federal programs in the local, and having them, give them maybe 10-15 minutes just to make them aware and bring some brochures, and then some of the programs that they grow will become more aware. I think that's something we try to regularly do in some of these few days or workshops or events we do here, at least in Alabama.
Yeah.
And I
Okay.
think
So
it's been a good strategy and a positive strategy for us.
yeah, so really helping people, the agents kind of meet farmers where they're at. It seems like just trying to get them into the same kind of same space.
Yes. Yes, because sometimes one thing is us talking about the federal programs, but the growers, they don't know who to reach out, where to go. And so having those individuals there, sometimes they dedicate some few minutes at the end or during lunch breaks. They can even go talk to them and they can directly help them when they're there.
Yeah. It just having that like information on hand for somebody who knows is so useful. It's more useful than being like, well, I can tell you where to go look for it, but it's totally different than having the agent there
Yes,
who's like, well, let me just explain it right here and now.
exactly. Yeah, and I think that it is something that has worked for us. So I've seen some growers
Cool.
really using, that are unaware of those programs, really looking for using and having assistance for those programs.
I have a question about, yeah, just the survey. So, you've got a lot of information here about perception practices people are using. Um, and maybe this isn't your realm, but I'm just curious of like what innovations or future research areas you think are really promising for improving co-management and conservation based off the survey. And this can be, maybe something your team has talked about, maybe something you think, just kind of what is like in the realm of possibility now that we have a little bit more information.
So I think in terms of research. I do a lot of research with water quality, pre-harvest water quality. So I would be maybe interesting on maybe in the future or even seeing more research focused on how actually how much those vegetative buffers could help prevent water contamination depending on the area the farmer is. You know, again, I mentioned a lot of our farms around Alabama, they have huge poultry operations close by, and you know how those buffers can on heavy rainfall events or during storms, how that buffer can filter, how much that buffer can help preventing those runoffs and all of that in the water. So the density of those vegetative buffers and all of that. So I think that's something in terms of research from my perspective, I will be interesting on doing something like that or getting to know more about that.
Yeah, I definitely think it also ties into some soil conservation as well, kind of going hand in hand with how our soil can kind of be like a natural sponge and filter for um,
Yeah.
things like excess
Know
water,
that,
flooding.
yeah, rotational grazing helps, reduce this some runoff through water sources as well. It helps to compact more soil and all of that. So again, all of this combination of practices, I think, again, it is a complex system. So it is not one or two or three strategies that can be done to promote food safety, but it's a combination of those practices that will both
Mhm.
help both sides.
Yeah, I feel like from my notes learning about this, it's not one size fits all, but there are some basics that people can do that are already kind of in line with what you might want to do if you're
Yes.
in sustainable mindset for your farm management. Um, and I'm excited for the survey to be published. It's not out yet, correct? Or it is, but it's not.
No, not yet. Yeah, hopefully
Cool.
soon.
Cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
well then we'll definitely keep people in line with, when that comes out. I know you offered up your contact information. Is there anything else you want people to know before we finish today, or just generally any thoughts about, the survey, your talk, food
Yeah,
safety?
well, if there is any pertinent questions or anything that you want to know more about it, or even about the programs that we offer, yeah, I'm open. Reach out to me, and I'm open to answer questions or talk more about that for sure.
Okay, awesome. Well, then I'll make sure to share that with everybody after today's webinar. I'll follow up with a recording. Somebody asked if we could get your slides, Camilla. I don't know if that's
Yes,
possible,
yes,
but
I can send you for sure.
okay, amazing. Then we'll follow up with everybody with all the amazing information Camilla shared with us today. But I want to thanks everybody for spending your afternoon with us and kind of learning a little something new, maybe a refresher, maybe on conservation and food safety. We're really happy to have you here. So thanks for joining us, Camilla.
Thank you so
Um,
much. Thanks so much. It was a pleasure for me.
yeah, well, great. I'll stop recording now and we'll release everybody um, from their computer screens. Go ahead.